passing base budgets for your birthday?
Well, you know what? Senator Jenkins pulled one of his bills that was not a very
Mr. President,
Wait
for just a second,
wait
Rich,
for
sorry.
Kirsten.
Okay, now we're good to go.
Welcome to Legislative Senate Update. I was wondering if we'd have much to do today, but we did have our base budget bills that we passed out, and maybe I'd turn some time over to Senator Hilliard and to just maybe brief you on those bills.
I'm glad to answer any questions. I think one thing that's really amazing is how our staff has put everything online. You can see the changes, you can see exactly what we've done in each committee. The House did their share today, and we'll get those first thing in the morning, so we'll finish those up. So we're in compliance with our rules to have our budget done by the 10th day. So tomorrow we'll have the base budgets done. I think this puts a good foundation now that we've always wanted to do and haven't really been able to do it the way we've done in the past, because committees just skipped over the base budget and wanted to go to the new money and how to spend the new money. I think now they've located, many of them, I think if not all, have located money within their budgets that they can reallocate and address some of those needs. So next we're going to have 4 more meetings of each committee. I think Wednesday and Friday, if I remember correctly, of the next 2 weeks. And then they will have their prioritization list, how they would propose funding it internally. And then we will then be able to work with them as we get our final revenue figures. As I indicated, it'll probably be the last of February when we get those, and then we'll be able to reallocate or allocate to the committees based on their prioritization list. And as you know, every committee probably will have far more than we'll be able to fund, and that's part of the process as we finally put it together.
Any questions on the budget?
How are you going to pay for the Lockhart STEM initiative?
It's not my initiative, don't ask me.
Yeah, but you're the budget chair. Nothing goes by without you. So what are some ideas?
I honestly don't know, Bob. I've heard different figures. I saw in the paper it was 200 to 300 million. I've heard it's less than that. I really don't know. If she needs $300 million, I think we're going to have to take it out of other programs, because as we know, we have I'm gonna go by the figure right now, about $150 million of ongoing general or education funds. We don't know what November or February is gonna bring. We may have more, but I think we all need to know a lot more. Just to ask me for a figure, if it's that important, I guess we can find it. We'll have to take out other programs. I certainly don't see a tax increase of any kind to pay for it.
I think
But is it that important for GOP leadership in the Senate right now to try and?
The big issue is, and we're waiting to hear the proposal, because we haven't got the meat of the proposal yet. There's a question, are we going to fund WPU? Are we going to fund educational growth? Or is all the money going to this initiative? Or what? We're wondering what those details are, and we don't know.
I'll answer this, Bob. If I were to try to figure out how to fund everything today, I'd go crazy. So I really have to wait until I know exactly how much money we have to spend, and then sit down with the appropriations chairs and with various legislators who have vested interest and see where exactly we can put the budget together. And at that point in time, I would hope that if Speaker Lockhart has a plan, that we'll know the details of it, and then we can sit down and see where to find the money. But I mean, I could worry all about it, and the revenue may be down $100 million, or it may be up $200 million. And so I've wasted all my time worrying.
Senator Robles, has this been an issue in your caucus?
You know, we're waiting for the bill. I mean, we haven't seen any language or any information, so it's hard to make. For us, the priority is to bring public education to where it needs to be in terms of funding, and also we're very supportive of Senator Pat Jones' bill that we think will bring some revenue, but I don't know that just sending it to STEM, it's the priority for our caucus at this point. We haven't seen the proposal.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussions on the budget? Okay.
I can just relax.
For now. Mr. President, I kind of want to get your reaction to the filing from the Attorney General's office on the battle over Amendment 3. They filed late last night. The crux of their arguments are that it's in the state's best interest to accommodate religious freedom by preserving solid harmony, and that redefining marriage would create strife was one of their points, and that Utah is currently the best setting to have and rear children, and the best environment for that is one man and one woman. Do you agree with those arguments? Do you like the direction that the Attorney General's going?
We support the Attorney General in the appeal to the 10th Circuit Court and to the arguments. Not having the legal position to be able to probably comment on those with any degree of I just don't have the background to comment on that. I know
Sure.
Senator Valentine has been a little bit involved in that. Senator Valentine, do you have any perspective you'd like to share on it?
Yeah, I'd be glad to.
Excuse me.
As you correctly observed, the briefs were due last night, and we were able to timely file those briefs. The arguments that we've made as a state are reflective of the people of this state. The people adopted Amendment 3 by over a 2/3 majority. They really recognize the issues of religious freedom. They recognize the issues of how do we raise children. They recognize the issues that we are raising the brief. And I think those are accurate reflections of what the people were voting on when they voted on Amendment 3.
Senator Robles, would you care to respond to this?
You know, I just saw that on the news, so we will have that discussion in our caucus meeting today. So I can't speak on behalf of our caucus, but I think, you know, there's been a lot of changes from 2003 to 2014 in terms of demographics and families look, you know, there are many different types of families, but we don't have the legal information. We just got information from our Office of Legislative Research and Counsel, and I just don't feel prepared to make any statements, and I can't speak on behalf of my caucus.
Well, I'm not asking any of you to be legal scholars on this, but I guess I'm just wondering how you feel about the state going in that direction. Do you agree with those, with the track that the state's
I think there's
going?
a lot of components. I understand the clear responsibility of the Attorney General's office, which is to defend the state and the laws of the state. I personally, I don't know that the resources should be put in that, how much resources, and we don't have all that information, so it's hard for me to make a statement. But in terms of, I think going back to what the intent of that constitutional amendment, as explained by Senator Valentine in 2003, it's important, but I don't know that it's also reflective of 2014 and where we are. But I haven't seen any of that information except what I read in the newspaper, so I don't have enough information to make any more statements.
We just got done talking about the base budget. The resources you're talking about in the form of money are going to be spent. Do you have any feeling about? I mean, the figure's been thrown out there, $3.5 million. Is it worth it? The state has a constitutional.
Senator Valentine could probably answer it better because he's been working closer, but the last figure I heard was 200,000. That could go a little bit more than that. Certainly the 3.5 was thrown out initially, but I think since Mr. Reyes has become the Attorney General, the figures have been substantially less than that. This 200,000 is what I heard.
Okay.
To the 10th Circuit.
Through the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, the total contract is $300,000 for all the attorneys who are assisting the Attorney General's office. The first $200,000 is for the lead counsel. The other two are broken up to contracts with two other attorneys who have significant experience in the U.S. Supreme Court. That's one of the areas that we don't have a whole lot of experience. We don't file many cases to the Supreme Court. And that's why we needed to have outside contract counsel for that purpose.
So is the state obviously the state's obligated to, by Constitution, to defend the current law. So by extension, would you say that this is money well spent? Are we all agreed that we've got to do this?
I think we really have to do this. We're talking about the framework of Utah's Constitution, as well as the statutes which were promulgated under that Constitution. So that becomes the whole baseline of discussion. It's one of the reasons why I think it was important that the Senate leadership and the House leadership said, let's just stop and take a breath on trying to pass a number of different pieces of legislation, because we are really looking at our constitutional base to determine how we are then going to go forward.
We also feel strongly that it's a jurisdictional issue. Marriage has been something that's been a state prerogative since the beginning of our country and the beginning of our state, and we feel it's a duty to defend our jurisdiction over the definition of marriage.
Yeah, for me, we've talked and we continue to talk about the encroachment of the federal government onto states' rights, and the sovereignty of the state is so significant that this is what I believe is an issue that ought to be determined by the state and not by the federal government, and along with a whole lot of other issues that we think ought to be determined by the state. So that alone, in my mind, is worthy of pursuing this. I just see what we do in Utah, and I think we obviously have things that we could do better on. We talked about that, but we do a lot of things really well, and I think we're functioning quite a bit better than the federal government. And I think to defer this back to the federal government is a real mistake, and I think it's worth pursuing on that basis alone.
There's been a consistent argument that we want to preserve the ability of the state to make decisions in the area that they have historically made those decisions. Marriage is one of those historic areas that the federal government has recognized that states have the prerogative to do. The Windsor case that was dealing with this issue recognized that very issue. Now it'll be up to the Supreme Court to decide whether or not they're going to revisit the state's ability to make this decision as articulated in Windsor in the cases before Windsor.
Just last June.
And I want to add, in answer to your question, I feel very comfortable with the arguments made by the Attorney General's office. I have a copy of the brief on my email. I haven't had a chance to read it, and I will read it. So I don't know how the details goes, but the general thing as you described, Richard, I'm very comfortable with.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
President Eaterhauser, have you spoken to the governor in the past week or two about Medicaid at all? Are there any discussions going on about where he might be headed with his decision?
I really haven't had any detailed discussion with him since the State of the State address. where he unveiled at least where he was going on Medicaid, and we didn't get a lot of details that night, so there's a lot of discussion to be had on that. But I think that we're looking for some kind of a Utah version of that, which means there may need to be some waivers, and that'll probably take some time. But we're very interested in that as a Senate. We've been having some caucus discussions about it. It's very important that we do what's best for Utah and try to create a system that will work for our people.
Is there any kind of unofficial deadline that you feel like lawmakers need to have his proposal so they can start talking about it before the session ends?
No, the session, the end of the session is obviously a time that's a time out there, but I don't think we want to be so rushed with this that we think that we have to have it done by the end of the session. We could always come into a special session if we're waiting for some word back from Washington, D.C. on a waiver or something like that.
Is it too early, budget-wise, to at least get an idea of whether it could come down to the speaker's technology initiatives and money being spent there and the Medicaid expansion? Is the budget going to be that tight, or is it too early? I'm just curious.
I give everyone the deadline as a Friday before the session ends, which I think is the 8th of March, or 7th of March. We have to print our bill up over that weekend. It takes about 48 hours to print it up. So if we spend all the money on whatever program it is, and then 2 weeks later, there's a decision made to expand Medicaid, and suddenly we need to find $20 or $40 million, that makes it very difficult, because we don't generally leave any real money on the table ongoing wise. There's sometimes some non-lapsing balances we keep there to make sure if we get to the end of the session, we're down a couple of $1 million, we can cover it. There's always a rainy day fund that we can take out of, but that's all one-time money.
But would you say that dealing with this Medicaid expansion question is a priority? Do you feel like that's got to be addressed so that you, in fact, so that you know what you're going to have to be dealing with?
You have two things. Number one, I understand there's no time deadline in the federal law, so we can do it anytime. But you have a practical deadline that if we end the session and we've spent all the money, and it takes more money to expand Medicaid or the technology program of the speaker, if the money's gone, the money's gone. And it's not that simple to come into session and raise money. For example, if you decide, and I'll just take a wild example, income tax. You can't raise income tax and immediately have the money. It takes the time period for that to collect. Sales tax, but you have to give some lead time. You can't just change the sales tax. So those kinds of things would take time. And again, there's not only that. I could give you what are we going to do about the prison? We're going to move the prison. We're going to build a pod. What about some of the other initiatives that we're hearing? So obviously Medicaid, obviously the speaker's program and education are big items, but there are other serious items, and all those are going to be floating around trying to get form and see how they all fit together. And then, like I say, once we know what the revenue is, probably the last week in February, first week in March, then the serious work begins about how to put it together.
And we don't know exactly how much the Medicaid expansion costs, but most of the costs are in subsequent years. And so the first years, at least probably for the next two, would have a huge fiscal impact.
That makes it even more tricky, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Because you don't have any idea how much that's going to be.
But it also helps us in this effort to take a little bit of time, make sure we can do what we would like to do in a Medicaid expansion.
I understand, even if we expand it and the federal government's promised to pay all the costs, that there are administrative costs, and I haven't gotten that figure, but there's $10 million. There's some substantial amount there. And I think the other thing, when you talk about the costs in the future, it hasn't been my experience that we really can trust what the federal government tells us is going to cost. So if they say expansion in 3 years from now is going to cost, say, $30 million or $50 million, I don't really trust that. You really have to see when you get there what it really is.
And it's a tough issue. The original interstate system was built with, I think, almost 100% federal money. The last expansion we did in Utah County was 100% state money. And we have to be careful as we look out into the future as to what our commitment is and how we can pay for it.
That's a really good point. So any other questions?
What's on your caucus agenda today?
Senator Okerlund is not here.
Singing happy birthday. to Senator
Well, I know you've done that.
Yeah.
President, I do have a few questions from texters.
Okay.
Two deal with
I
SB
don't have
100.
Senator Okerlund here who has the agenda.
Two of them deal with SB 100, so maybe I'll read them full. If the majority of the population of Utah believes the legislature should pass a statewide anti-discrimination bill that would apply to housing and jobs regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation, why does the Senate refuse to hear the bill? The next question related to that was, are you going to hear SB 100? If not, do you think it's morally just to ignore constituents?
I think we've been clear about this in previous legislative updates. But the position of the Senate at this point, as we're discussing, or as we have an appeal before the 10th Circuit, is that we're going to have all religious liberties and an SB 100 we're going to have a stand down on those bills this session. We've got agreement with the House at this time, and so that's something we're going to run by our caucus today. So that is one item that we'll be discussing. But I'm confident that the Senate Majority Caucus is going to support that position. There's a lot of risk to the ordinances that are passed by Salt Lake City and Provo and Logan and some of the other cities here. If we start to talk about religious liberties, last year was a big gun year, and this year we have hardly any gun bills. And it really highlights the need to wait for a time that there's probably a little less emotion. And also, we feel very uncomfortable as legislators passing legislation in an environment we don't know about yet. And Senator Valentine has highlighted that a decision at the Supreme Court could change the environment for this issue to a great degree. And should we be addressing this, it seems premature to us.
You want the other one now?
Yes.
What role should the LDS Church play in influencing legislation and influencing Utah's alcohol laws, for instance?
Well, the LDS Church is a church that represents a significant portion of our population, but there are a lot of other stakeholders in this. And our process is that we're listening to all the stakeholders with regards to SB 100, alcohol law, and what other issues that come up that have interest.
Probably get in trouble saying this, but I've only been here 34 years. I can't remember a time that a spokesman from the LDS Church has ever called me or contacted me or asked me and told me how to vote. And so when people talk about the influence of the LDS Church, as President Niederhauser said, a lot of my district, a lot of people who vote for me are LDS. And I appreciate, as I've said often, the prayers that we hear from diverse groups. And I love to hear that because it reminds me every day that I'm not up here doing budgets and money. I'm up here representing people. And so when we talk about the LDS Church influences, I can tell you, maybe I need to serve longer than 34 years, but I've never had the LDS Church or a spokesman for the LDS Church ever tell me how to vote on an issue or ask me to vote on an issue.
Same with me, and I've only been here 8 years. So any other questions before we close up? Okay, thank you very much for being here, and thanks for all those in the public that have been watching today.